financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Today's October 30th, 2017, almost at the end of month. No blow-ups yet. October is, I guess, turning out to be a disappointing month. But, hey, as always, email me with questions, comments, kl@kerrylutz.com. Don't forget our Twitter feed @KerryLutz. So, hey, Bitcoin right now, right this moment, and I realize this is dated information, is trading at $6,060.99. Well, John Tamny is here, Forbes contributor, recently wrote an article, and again, it was only 8 days ago, but it's already dated. Bitcoin's surge to 5,600 is a reminder of why it's a junk currency. So first, John, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Kerry, great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Hey, so it went down to 5,600, and it was up to 6,500. It's at 60 right now. I mean, what criteria are you using to evaluate it and come to the conclusion that it's a junk currency?
Well, my criteria is basic. The sole use of money is to circulate consumable goods. I've got bread, I want your wine, but you want the butcher's meat. Money is the common agreement among people about value. It's an agreement about value that enables exchange. And so historically, money was stable in terms of value. This notion of a strong or weak dollar would have David Ricardo and Adam Smith. I would add to some degree John Maynard Keynes, would have Vladimir Lenin thinking, what are they talking about? Money's only useful insofar as it allows us to exchange real wealth with one another. And so, people can say what they want. Okay, Bitcoin's a speculation on the U.S. Treasury's oversight of the dollar. Okay, fine. If that's what you want it to be, let it be that. But don't call it money. Because let's imagine you and me transacting in Bitcoin. Okay, Kerry, I want to remodel my house. I'll pay you 10 Bitcoin now and 10 at the end of the year. And you would say to me, okay, well, which Bitcoin? The one that began at $900 in 2017, the one that was at $6,500, or the one that's at $66,000 now? And the point is, one way or the other, if we did a contract in this, one of us would get swindled. So is it any wonder that floating currencies more broadly have led to major, trade disputes over the years? It's the floating that's the problem. So Bitcoin isn't a currency. It's just a speculation. It's an investment, but that's not money.
All right. So, when you go back, John, to the classical economists, they had a definite definition of money. Number one, medium of exchange, which at this point, Bitcoin pretends to be. Maybe it's in 100,000 stores, they'll accept it, but it really isn't until you can go down to the 7-Eleven and buy your double gulp, your big gulp soda until it's banned anyway. It's not a medium of exchange. It's not universal. Even credit cards really aren't universal. Still plenty of places don't take them. So medium of exchange, portability. I will say it's portable. You can carry it in your phone. Divisibility, durability. I don't know what happens when North Korea sets off the EMP and the grid is shut down. How do you use Bitcoin then? And, it's got a few other features. Store of value. You could argue it's a store, but it's not a stable store of value. So as bad as your greenbacks are, the concept of the cryptocurrency as it now stands, or as I've coined the term kleptocurrency, it's got a lot of barriers in its path. But do you ever foresee the day, John, that it becomes legitimate money?
Without question. The argument I made in my book, Who Needs the Fed, is that private money is the future. But it's going to be stable. And so people say, well, what's that going to be? How do you know this? Well, I don't know, but I also don't know why I've got a smartphone in my hand that 10 years ago, if the technology existed, would have cost $12 million. It's funny how markets produce all sorts of things. And money was never a creation, wasn't initially a creation of the state. It was just a creation of producers who wanted a common agreement on value that would enable exchange of the real wealth. And so, to me, private money is wholly logical just because the U.S. Treasury can devalue the dollar. But we don't really have any choice around it. Whereas if J.P. Morgan, Walmart, or Target devalues the dollars they issue, we move on to some other issue or of an agreement about value, something that would be universally exchanged. And so Bitcoin, does it have a future as a currency? Not in its present condition, because once again, how could we transact with it? How could you make a donation in it? How could you make a contract in it? Imagine if the dollar, which is the world's currency today, surged 522% in a year. Assuming you then said, okay, we are going to demand that all contracts be denominated and carried through in these dollars, you'd have mass bankruptcies around the world. The chaos would be immeasurable. Okay, well, so currency can't be a global currency, or Bitcoin can't be a global currency so long as it has no discernible fixed value.
Right. Hey, well, what you're saying is very true. Look, when the dollar went up from 70 to 100, we had major economic issues. American exporters crying the blues. The world just start dumping more and more goods upon the U.S. And that's nothing compared to a Bitcoin type parabolic move.
Well, and I don't buy the dumping argument. I mean, look, the only reason we're producing is to get something in return. If the world wants to shower us with goods, okay, thumbs up. That's why we're going to work every day in the first place. And I've never bought that strong currencies make it difficult to export. Look at how the yen surged against the dollar in the 70s and 80s, yet Japanese exports to the U.S. went up enormously. Money is ultimately a veil, but if the measure that you're using is that volatile, and the dollar's never been as volatile as Bitcoin has been, imagine the global economic impact, because no currency, no contracts mean anything. Now, what we've certainly seen is it any surprise since 1971 when the U.S. Treasury and Nixon decided to delink the dollar from gold? The world had been on a dollar standard. Well, the world is still realistically on a dollar standard, but is it any surprise that trade disputes have gone up massively since 1971? Well, no, of course not, because no contracts mean what they used to mean. The value of them changes all the time. So whereas trade used to just be about the exchange of, bread for wine, now it's there are winners and losers in it. There lies the problem.
Yeah, well, I guess now that you can print up unlimited amounts of currency to buy foreign goods, and you don't have to worry about depleting the country's gold reserves to do this, there's no real check or balance on international trade and on the values of currencies.
Well, see, even then, I might question that a little too, this whole money printing thing. Look, the most valuable currencies and the most stable currencies in the world tend to be the most heavily circulated. The Argentine peso has plummeted in the last 60, 70 years. The supply of the peso is much, much less than the Swiss franc. Good money is heavily demanded. And then I reject the notion that the U.S. Treasury or the Fed, whatever you want to use, could print up dollars and enable U.S. imports. So who would just accept junk currency in exchange for real economic goods? The dollar does have some sort of global reputation. You drop a dollar on the ground in Botswana, you're going to have lots of people racing up to it because it's a lot more exchangeable than the currency there. And that would be true in Argentina, that'd be true in Haiti, true in Peru, you name it. The problem, I say again, is that the dollar's been awful. Yeah, of course it's been awful, so much worse than 71. But it's still, look, 2/3 of dollars are around the world. It's still the most globally accepted currency. My argument's always been, think what it could be if Treasury had a stable definition for it, as it once did.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, look, when you look from from 1787, from the Coinage Act to 1913, the average inflation was 0.12% a year. Obviously there were some inflationary events like the War of 1812 and the Civil War that drove up prices, but then they reverted to the mean. And that's a pretty remarkable track record when you think about it, John.
It is, but I think it also speaks to an important point, which you allude to. You don't need a central bank to devalue the currency. It's not as though the dollar didn't have some horrid episodes before the Fed existed. And then you look at the 20th century, the dollar, the Fed is introduced in 1913, but the dollar held its value until 1933. Was the big devaluation in 33 a Fed decision? No. Fed Chair Eugene Meyer begged FDR not to devalue the dollar, was ignored, and he in fact resigned over it. Fast forward to 1971, Arthur Burns begged Nixon, John Connally, do not delink the dollar from gold. You guys don't have a clue about what you're doing, and he was ignored too. And so, I don't buy the correlation that the Fed is the problem. I'm not defending the Fed. I think it's an offense to common sense. We don't need it. But poorly run countries do a lousy job with their currencies. I don't buy the Fed correlation that most people do.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Fed's more a symptom of the problem than the actual problem itself, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, look, lots of countries have central banks. And so there's this view that central banks control the economy, that they enable lots of government spending. Oh, really? Well, so where's all the government spending in Bahamas? Because they've got a central bank. Where's all the spending in Nigeria? They've got one. Where's all the QE from those countries? No, central banks can only engage in all this nonsense insofar as the country's already rich in the first place. We've got this massively ridiculous, pointless, and witless central bank because we're the richest country on earth. It's not an enabler of anything. It's just this thing. It's just another example of all the people you can employ if you're the richest country in the world doing wholly unproductive work.
So it's kind of a form of decadence, isn't it?
Of course it is. Is it a mistake? Is it mere coincidence that the Federal Reserve employs more economists than any other central bank in the world? I don't think so. A rich country can waste lots and lots of money. My argument, who needs the Fed, is that why do people take this seriously? I don't buy that it's influential one way or the other. I think if it were a fraction of as powerful as people assume, the U.S. would be an incredibly impoverished country. I think the fact that the U.S. is the richest country in the world, the fact that we are a magnet for global investment, even in our somewhat weakened state, is an example that the Fed's just not that important.
Yeah, so speaking of the Fed, obviously a new Fed chairperson, probably chairman, is going to be appointed imminently. Is this a big yawn?
I think so. Let's look at Alan Greenspan. You and I are Fed skeptics. He was viewed as a genius from 1987 to 2001. A strong dollar genius, knew how to pull the strings of the economy. Then from 2001 to 2006, he wasn't viewed as a genius and the dollar weakened. Did Greenspan's policies change? Did his policies on the dollar and more broadly pulling the economy strings change? No. Under Reagan and Clinton, economic policy was broadly good. I don't include HW in there one term. Under George W. Bush, economic policy was awful. Treasury devalued the dollar. Tariffs, Sarbanes-Oxley, massive government spending increases. I don't see the Fed's role in here. Why would something that deals with banks that are antiquated and yesterday have some sort of broad economic impact? So Trump may keep Janet Yellen and maybe Jerome Powell, who I've never heard of. John Taylor just terrifies me because I think this notion of setting interest rates to something as worthless as GDP I find ridiculous and statist. But, I don't see the difference. I don't see where the Fed's power is.
Yeah, well, maybe the Fed and central banking in general has seen its day, but like any power institution, they're not going to go down without a fight, are they?
Oh, I don't think they'll ever go down. And the reason I don't is because Congress loves having a convenient whipping boy. Every time the economy is weakened, they can always point to, oh, the Fed raised interest rates too quickly. Oh, yeah, sure. So the notion there that the Fed can control flows of credit is just laughable. Implicit there is that rent controls work, that when New York decrees a low, artificially low rental rate, that apartments multiply. Well, we know that that's not true. Well, same idea with the 0% interest rate. That somehow makes credit easy. Well, the last I saw, when you borrow dollars, you're borrowing access to real economic goods. So we're supposed to believe that these clowns in Washington, divining a rate that they just come up with out of thin air. Actually, no, I think banks actually lead them on the rate. We're supposed to believe that governs the flow of economic resources. Let's be serious. Credit's so expensive in Silicon Valley that you have to give up a big portion of your business, equity credit, so that you can turn a concept into a business. The best producers in Hollywood are turned down 90% of the time. Donald Trump couldn't get a loan for decades before he became president. This notion that the Fed can make credit easy is so divorced from economic reality.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting, though, to watch, because I think they can have some impact. I don't know whether they're just figuring out what direction everyone's heading in and then leading them there, or whether they're really leading anything. But you would argue no. Hey, switching gears here, you wrote an article about the NFL, and maybe the NFL and the Fed have a lot more in common than you ever believe possible. Your take on what's happening on their decline, and has it reached the point of no return?
Well, guys like you and me, I think would you agree with my statement that recessions, when they're untouched, signal the looming economic boom, simply because recessions cleanse out all the bad habits, all the misuses of labor, the bad investments. Yeah, so
malinvestment.
You and I agree there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, malinvestment, all the stuff that we don't want. Recessions signal the boom on the way because they cleanse out what we don't need. And so, in the NFL, there are recessions all the time. They're benching quarterbacks all the time. They are firing coaches all the time. This is very healthy. It's incredibly difficult to be a head coach, incredibly difficult to be a quarterback. Well, I would add it's incredibly difficult to oversee an organization in total, to know whom to hire, to know how to allocate resources. Isn't it interesting that the NFL doesn't have a bylaw that we can fire owners, as in if your ineptitude is consistent over the decades, we should tell you that you're in a private business, just as McDonald's debrands restaurants all the time, just as Ritz-Carlton debrands hotels. We are going to force a sale because your ineptitude is bringing us all down. And that's my argument. The NFL, if you want to improve the NFL, force the sale of the Redskins, because Dan Snyder has been a tragically bad owner for at least now 2 decades. Force sales just as you would in any other industry. It's not a violation of private property. Everyone in this league, in this private club, owns a piece of it. The weak owners bring down the strong. So fire them, force them to get out of the league.
Yeah, well, I like the concept, and it is a bunch of private companies that have banded together, but it's almost like they're serving a public function when you see all the antitrust exemptions and all the subsidies they get. Is it time to cut them off and stop their protections and the subsidies?
Oh, yeah. I mean, now I'm one of these people who thinks that if we got rid of the antitrust exemption, it wouldn't mean a whole lot. Where's the competition that's going to enter this marketplace? But okay, maybe so, and good if so. But yeah, the stadium subsidies are ridiculous. They're just another version of a Fed helicopter drop. They don't achieve anything economically, as anyone can see by visiting the neighborhoods around most NFL stadiums. They're usually awful, and so the notion that there's economic growth defies common sense. Is that it? For listeners who don't believe me, just go to Yankee Stadium and look at the Yankees. 81 games a year. Where's all the economic growth around that palace? And so, and the subsidies. But I just think it'd be interesting to see. People ask them, they say, well, you're just being Marxist. You're violating property rights. And I'm saying, no, I'm not. Again, McDonald's forces out bad owners all the time simply because a bad owner can bring down the brand in total. Top hotel chains are constantly debranding ones that aren't measuring up. Well, a bad owner, a persistently bad owner whose team is most often out of the playoffs, is bringing down the value of the whole league, of every team in the league. And so I think the owners should get together and say, we are instituting a rule that when you buy in, we reserve the right, let's say at 2/3 vote, to vote you out of the league where you have to sell.
I like the concept. McDonald's, when you buy one, you agree in your franchise agreement that if your sales drop beneath what they expect by a certain percentage, they can take control of your store, install their own manager. They'll send in Ronald McDonald. They'll do all these events to bring your store back. And, that probably wouldn't be a bad thing for these sports leagues. But, when you're talking about all the great good that stadiums do, which is none, they're just a drain on the public purse, it made me start thinking of convention centers. Because one thing that politicians love to build, it's convention centers, and then they like to expand them, and stadiums. They're both white elephants for the most part. Maybe you could make the argument in Las Vegas, because theirs is the biggest in the world and probably the most active. But still, I'd love to see the financial statements and see the costs. And if it's so wonderful, why wouldn't the private sector do it anyway?
Kerry, I love what you say. You're so right. Convention centers are just a classic politician thing. Look at all the money we're bringing in through these convention centers. But think about that. If the economic growth isn't there to begin with, that money arrives, it's spent, but no one's going to expand based on very little economic activity in the area. So the money's banked and it's lent well outside the city. Convention centers are a helicopter drop. And I think your point about Vegas is a valid one. The convention center there was an effect of the fact that it was already a popular place to arrive to. You would never need government money to fund a convention center in Vegas, but these other places, it's just it's a way to waste our money.
Oh, and they're masterful at it, downright masterful. Because, like the big convention centers are always financed by the government, but you go into these big hotels, like take Orlando, for instance, and they all have convention centers built into them. So the idea of the major hotel chains getting together in a place like Orlando or Las Vegas, saying, let's do a joint venture, build a convention center, and we're going to run it better than the city of Las Vegas or the city of Orlando, because we're not going to have all these hack politicians, third cousins, running the place. Makes a lot of sense, but somehow it feels like we'll never get back to that, John.
Of course not, because politicians exist to spend. And, part of this is a bullish story. Americans are so productive and so busy creating wealth that one of the negative trade-offs to all that is that they don't pay attention to what these lunatics in office are doing. And so a lot of spending takes place, and they say, oh, we don't worry about it, we're doing too well. But what we've always got to consider, of course, is the unseen. Imagine the economic growth. Imagine all the cancer cures. Imagine all the innovations that would make the internet seem dated. It's not taking place because they're spending so much of our precious wealth. It's sad.
The crowding out effect, when even though they're printing up the money, they're diminishing the value of the money. And then there are valuable projects that can't get funded because the government has crowded them out.
Yeah, well, I would say just crowding out, I think it's more that, look, every dollar the government spends is a dollar consumed rather than invested. but it's also every dollar the government spends means they have more control over the economy. Well, the track record there globally is pretty good. Is pretty clear that more government control, less economic growth. The seen is that we're the richest country on earth, but the unseen is unfathomable. We should be exponentially richer than we are, if not for all this waste.
Oh, absolutely. Could not agree with you more. John, we find your work over at Forbes, correct? Any other outlets we can find you?
Yeah, Forbes, realclearmarkets.com, where I'm the editor. You can find everything there that I write at Forbes and everywhere else. And then on Amazon, I've got 2 books out, and then my 3rd comes out in May. So everyone who's listening should buy several copies of each.
Absolutely. What's the book going to be about?
Oh, this one's been another very optimistic one. It's titled The End of Work, and it argues that the future of work is one in which most people will wake up on Sundays and be unable to wait for Monday. They'll be so excited to go to work. My argument is the future of work is that it's going to feel a lot like it's not work, as in we're going to do what we love in return for pay. And so that's happening in the U.S. right now and other parts of the world. I think it's going to more and more become the norm.
Hey, well, we'll be a nation of podcasters and bloggers, and I don't know if that's enough to keep the economy moving forward, but I guess we're going to find out. So
we are. It's going to be beautiful.
Yeah, well, I can't wait. Actually, I'm living the dream already. But hey, any questions, comments for John, myself? Email is kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @kerrylutz, and the Facebook page is Financial Survival Network. Don't forget, we're having that webinar on that very subject that John and I discussed in the beginning, Bitcoin. That's coming up on November 1st, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Just go over to FSN and you'll find the information there. John, it's always a pleasure. Keep up the great work. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Gary, thank you so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial